By candlelight, when the world was silent, lovers of the Middle Ages let their hearts speak in ink. Whispers across parchment. The Middle Ages were not an age of silence. Beneath the clang of blacksmiths, the tolling of monastery bells, and the shuffle of peasants in muddy streets, there was another sound, quieter, fragile, yet enduring. The scratching of quills upon parchment. Love in the medieval world was seldom shouted. It was dangerous, complicated, and often forbidden. Yet men and women still wrote. They wrote by firelight in castles, in cloisters, in cramped chambers smelling of ink and beeswax. They wrote in Latin, in Old French, in Provençal verse, even in clumsy, uneven script where the passion burned stronger than the penmanship. A knight on campaign might whisper his longing through careful letters carried by a squire, folded tight against the breast to keep it safe. A lady in a tower might compose delicate verses, hiding them beneath the psalter so the chaplain would not see. Monks, despite vows of chastity, sometimes found themselves writing words that blurred the line between divine and earthly love. These were not just words on parchment, they were lifelines. To touch the ink of a beloved was to touch their soul. To hold a sealed wax emblem was to feel their hand in absence. Letters crossed mountains, rivers, and kingdoms, often never arriving, sometimes intercepted, yet always written in the hope that love might find a way. In this story, we will follow these voices, knights, queens, troubadours, and secret lovers, whose ink still whispers across the centuries. For though kingdoms crumbled, their letters remain, carrying the pulse of a heart that once beat for another. The knight's hand. Sir Alaric bent low over the small oak table, his armor abandoned for a plain woolen tunic. The candle guttered in its iron holder, and the parchment before him bore faint smudges where he had already pressed too hard. He was no poet, no troubadour strumming in a hall. He was a knight, bred for sword and saddle, not for ink. And yet tonight his weapon was the quill. The war in Aquitaine had pulled him far from Lady Eleanor's lands, where her window overlooked the orchard. He remembered the way the blossoms scattered over her hair when the spring wind shook the branches. The memory gnawed at him, stronger than hunger. "Most noble Eleanor," he began, the words clumsy, almost too formal. He crossed them out, ink blotted like a wound. He tried again. "My dearest heart." That felt nearer, closer to what he meant. The rest came slowly, in halting strokes. His loneliness at night in the camp, the cold of his tent without her warmth, the thought that her prayers alone gave him courage. When he finished, he pressed his signet into warm wax and sealed it, the emblem of his house marking his longing. He gave it to his squire with strict command, "Guard this as you would your sword." The letter would cross muddy fields, fording rivers swollen by spring rains, slipping past bandits who knew the value of ransom. But if it reached Eleanor's hands, if she touched the same parchment he had touched, then across the distance they would be together, bound by ink more enduring than iron. A lady's reply. In her chamber overlooking the orchard, Lady Eleanor sat with the letter pressed to her lips before she dared unfold it. The wax seal was cracked carefully with her dagger, though she felt almost guilty breaking what he had sealed with such intent. As the parchment opened, the faint scent of smoke and leather clung to it, as though Alaric himself had ridden into her room. She read slowly, savoring each word. His hand was uneven, letters slanting as though written in haste between marches. But she saw past the ink to the man she loved, the knight who had lifted her veil once at a feast, the man who had held her hand for the length of a hymn before propriety tore them apart. Her heart fluttered at the words. "My dearest heart," clumsy, yet more precious than any troubadour's verse. She traced them with her finger, as though she could feel his pulse in each stroke. The world around her was not kind to women who loved too freely. Her marriage prospects were discussed in corridors, her dowry weighed like gold, her future bargained at tables she was not invited to. Yet here, in this hidden letter, she was not a pawn but a beloved. She reached for her own quill. Her writing was finer, trained under the watch of tutors, each curve precise. But what she wrote was not for any scribe's eyes. Your words, though few, have lit the hours of my night. I pray the saints keep you safe and return you soon, for every blossom that falls reminds me of you. She sealed it with green wax and hid it beneath her psalter until her maid could slip it to the messenger. She whispered softly into the parchment before it was carried away, as if breath itself could linger between the lines. And thus, a dialogue of ink began, two hearts across battlefields and orchard walls, speaking more honestly in letters than they could in life. The troubadour's song on paper. Far to the south, in a court where the air was rich with orange blossoms and harp strings, a troubadour bent over parchment much as a knight might bend over steel. His name was Guillaume, a poet with a voice that could silence a hall or rouse it to laughter. Yet the words he wrote tonight were not meant to be sung to a crowd. They were meant for one pair of eyes only. The lady he adored was highborn, far above him, untouchable beneath the codes of courtly love. To speak his longing aloud would risk disgrace, or worse, banishment. So Guillaume disguised his heart in verse, crafting stanzas where her name was hidden in acrostic, where each line seemed playful to outsiders but burned with secret fire to the one who could unravel them. He wrote of the falcon that longed for freedom but returned faithfully to its mistress's hand. He wrote of the rose that bloomed in winter against all reason, of the moon who shone brighter when gazed upon by a single star. To others, it was performance. To her, it was confession. He sealed the parchment with a blob of crimson wax and slipped it to a trusted page who played his lute at feasts. The boy would know how to pass it discreetly, folded within a songbook, unnoticed by the watchful eyes of jealous husbands and sharp-tongued chaperones. When the lady at last opened it, she read in silence, her lips barely parting at the recognition of her name spelled down the margin. She pressed the parchment to her breast, her heart quickening. Though she might never speak a word aloud, though her life was bound by vows of obedience, here was a voice that had reached her, brave enough to leap across the chasm of rank and duty. Love, in the Middle Ages, often wore armor of secrecy. And yet, it was in these hidden letters and veiled poems that it burned most brightly. The Queen's Secret Script. In a stone chamber lined with tapestries, Queen Isolde sat with her ladies dismissed. The night was late, the hearth burned low, and only a single lamp lit her table. Before her lay a sheet of vellum smoother than most would ever touch, costly, rare, and meant for matters of state. Yet she bent over it not as sovereign, but as a woman with a heart too restless to sleep. Her husband, the king, was away in a distant war, his letters to her dry with military detail, troop movements, grain supplies, treaties in progress. He was dutiful, steady, a man who ruled as the church demanded. But her heart had grown restless in the silences between his words. In the quiet of her court, she had found companionship in a knight of lesser rank, Sir Tristan, who bore himself with humility but whose eyes spoke a language she could not ignore. Words were dangerous between them, glances perilous, yet still she wrote. Her script was careful, elegant, as though diplomacy itself cloaked her passion. To the one whose loyalty surpasses even oath and armor, I write not as queen but as a soul who has found in yours a mirror. I pray this page find its way to you unseen, for though I sit crowned, it is in your presence alone I feel whole. She sprinkled sand across the wet ink to dry it, then folded the parchment thrice and sealed it with plain wax, no emblem of crown or state, only a pressed imprint of her ring turned inward, indistinct, secret. The letter was entrusted to her chambermaid, who knew the silent weight of her queen's heart and asked no questions. To carry such a message was treason, yet love has often made accomplices of the faithful. Somewhere in the shadows of the castle, Tristan would read her words by torchlight, and though armies and oaths stood between them, he would know that a queen had written not to her people, but to him. The monk's confession. Brother Matthew sat in the cloister garden, quill trembling between his fingers. The moon cast pale silver across the stone arches, and the fragrance of lavender drifted in from the herb beds the brothers tended. He should have been copying psalms, illuminating letters with careful gold leaf, but tonight his heart demanded another kind of ink. His vow of chastity was a fortress around him, yet within those walls grew a restlessness he could not name. A noblewoman, Lady Clara, had visited the abbey weeks before, bringing gifts for the poor and kneeling reverently in the chapel. She had spoken little, yet her voice lingered in his memory, a sound both soft and piercing, like the hymn of the choir carried through the nave. And so Matthew wrote, not boldly, not directly, but in words twisted between devotion and longing. To she who carries grace more radiant than the Virgin's lamp, I dare confess only through ink what my tongue cannot speak. Your image has followed me into prayer, and though I strike it down with each Ave, it rises again, clothed in light. He signed no name, only a cross, as though to hide behind the shadow of Christ himself. He folded the parchment, and placed it in the hollow of a psalter binding, knowing Lady Clara's chaplain often borrowed their books. Perhaps, by providence or by fate, she might open this one and see. If she did, would she understand? Would she laugh, or scorn, or pray for him? He could not know. Yet as he laid the psalter on the shelf, his heart raced faster than when he had ever fasted, prayed, or sung. For love, in all its guises, cared little for walls of stone or oaths whispered beneath vaulting arches. It slipped between cloisters like moonlight, impossible to contain. The peasant girl's hand. In a thatched cottage on the edge of a muddy lane, a girl named Anselma crouched by the hearth with a scrap of parchment, salvaged from a merchant's discarded ledger. Ink she had none, so she mixed soot with drops of water and a little goose fat, thick and clumsy but dark enough to stain the page. Her quill was a sharpened feather plucked from a hen that still strutted angrily in the yard. Anselma was no scholar. Her letters were crooked, her spelling wild, but her heart beat with more urgency than any tutor's lessons could have taught. She wrote to Johann, a farm boy who had gone to serve as a page in the castle. He had promised her before he left that he would not forget the meadow where they used to gather wildflowers, nor the time they had shared a crust of bread under the willow when summer storms rolled through. Her hand shook as she scratched out the words. Johann, I hope you eat well. I keep the ribbon you tied for me, I wear it every day. The lambs are fat now, and the apples are red. I think of you each time the sun sets, for that is when you looked at me last. Come back, if God allows, for my heart waits by the willow tree. She sealed it not with wax, there was none, but with a sprig of rosemary tied in twine, pressed flat against the fold. A passing peddler agreed to carry it to the castle gates, more out of pity than profit. Her words might seem rough beside a queen's or a troubadour's, but they were no less filled with longing. For love did not belong only to gilded halls and jeweled rings. It bloomed, just as fiercely, in fields of mud and smoke, carried on the breath of girls who dared to write though no one had taught them how. Letters across the crusade. Miles away, where the dust of foreign roads clung to armor and the call of strange tongues filled the air, Sir Geoffrey sat by a dim fire outside Jerusalem. He had marched under the cross, leaving behind his wife, Margaret, and their small son. For months he had heard nothing, letters lost to the sea, stolen by raiders, or perhaps never sent at all. Tonight, with the clang of swords stilled, he dared to write. His parchment was creased, his ink thin, but his hand steady. To my most faithful Margaret, I live still, though many brothers lie beneath foreign soil. The stars above this land are the same that shine over you, and when I look upon them, I feel less alone. Pray for me, as I do for you, that God may grant I see your face again. Tell our boy I remember the weight of him in my arms, and that no battle has taken his image from me." He folded it, kissed the edge of the vellum, and handed it to a chaplain who would return with the next convoy. Months later, in a quiet English manner, Margaret opened the worn parchment, her hands trembling so fiercely she nearly tore it. Tears fell onto the words, blurring the ink, yet she read them aloud to her son, who listened wide-eyed, clutching the hem of her gown. She answered at once, her handwriting neat though stained by candle smoke. "Beloved, each night I keep your place at table though you are far. Our son grows strong, and when he speaks, it is of you. I bind this letter with prayer, that angels may carry it swifter than ships or horses, for I cannot count the days until you return." She sealed it with green wax, pressing into it not her husband's crest but a simple cross. For in those years of peril, it was not just marriage that bound them, but faith, and the fragile hope that love might outlast both war and distance. The hidden letter. In the echoing stone halls of a northern castle, where banners swayed in the draught and guards paced with heavy boots, Lady Beatrice lived bound by rank. She was promised to a duke she scarcely knew, his lands and hers to be joined in a union of power. Yet her heart had chosen otherwise. It beat for Thomas, the steward's son, who carried ledgers and keys at his belt but no title, no crest. Their words in public were clipped, respectful. But in the shadowed stairwells, in hurried glances when no one watched, the truth flickered bright and dangerous. They could not speak openly, so Beatrice turned to parchment. She wrote in a delicate hand, her ink flowing as though it might soften the harsh walls around her. "If I am caged by duty, know that my soul has flown to you. Each step I take in silk and jewels feels heavy, save when I think of your eyes, which unburden me. I write what I cannot say, for silence would kill me swifter than any sword." She folded the note small, so small it could be hidden in the palm of a hand. When Thomas came to deliver accounts, she slipped it beneath the cover of the ledger. No one noticed. That night, alone in his chamber, Thomas unfolded it with trembling fingers. He pressed his lips to the ink, as though it were her skin. For a moment, the gulf of rank and fate closed, and he held her heart in his hands. Their secret would never be carved in chronicles, nor praised in song. Yet for them, this hidden letter was more precious than all the treaties signed in castles, for it carried the most forbidden vow of all, love that defied the world's design. The Seasoned Quill. In a quiet village not far from Canterbury, a gray-haired scribe named Robert sat hunched at his table, his joints stiff from years of work. His wife, Agnes, tended the hearth behind him, her hands callous but steady. They had lived together for nearly 4 decades, through harvests and famines, through the loss of 2 children and the birth of 3 more, through plague that had emptied whole streets, yet left their household standing. Still, Robert wrote. Not with the fiery secrecy of youth, nor the desperate longing of distance, but with the calm devotion of years shared. His script was elegant, his Latin polished, but tonight he chose the English tongue, plain and unadorned. Agnes, my dearest companion, each day with you is worth more than gold leaf on parchment. I remember the first time you brought me bread at the scriptorium door. You were but 17, and I thought you lovelier than any illuminated saint. Now your hair is silver, and your hands bear lines of toil, yet I swear you are more beautiful still, for I see in you not only youth but all our years together. I write these words though you sit in the same room, for I wish to leave you something when I no longer rise to take the quill. When he placed the folded note into her apron pocket, Agnes laughed, soft and startled. She had not expected such words after so many years, when love had become routine, shared bread, mended clothes, prayers whispered side by side. She read them later, by the glow of the fire, her eyes misting. And she answered in her own plain hand. Robert, I too remember. May we have yet more days together, for the Lord has been kind, though stern. If you leave me first, I will keep this letter with my rosary, for it is my treasure. In their exchange, there was no secrecy, no peril, no youthful blush. Only the enduring truth that love, once inked upon the heart, never fades. The bold hand of desire. In the Duchy of Aquitaine, where poets thrived and courts glittered with song, Lady Isabeau defied the silence expected of women. She was no timid maid, no shrinking flower behind a veil. Her spirit was fierce, and her letters no less so. When she wrote to her beloved, she wasted no ink on caution. Her quill danced fast across the parchment, the strokes sharp, impatient, alive. My heart burns, and I will not smother it. You ride far, and I count the hours like grains of sand falling in glass. Come swiftly, for each day without you is torment. When you left, you kissed my hand before my lady's. I wished you had kissed my mouth. I wished all the world to see that I am yours. There was danger in such words. If intercepted, they could bring scandal, disgrace, perhaps even ruin. But Isabeau wrote as though fire itself guided her pen. She sealed the letter with scarlet wax, pressed not with her family crest but with her own signet, a hawk in flight. Her messenger was no courtly page but a loyal maid who would brave the roads by night. And when her knight received the letter, weary from travel, he read it by torchlight and felt his heart blaze as fiercely as hers. In an age where many women cloak their feelings in allegory and prayer, Isabeau's ink was naked, fearless. Some would have called it reckless. Yet love that burns so brightly seldom hides in shadows. It seeks to be read, to be known, to sear itself upon the heart of the beloved. And so, centuries later, her letter still whispers not of caution, but of the raw, unbridled pulse of desire. The letter that never arrived. On a storm-swept night in Flanders, a young knight named Henri bent low over his saddlebag by the campfire. He had carried with him for months a letter, folded and refolded so often that the parchment had softened like cloth. It was written in a woman's hand, delicate, with ink that had blurred slightly from the press of his fingers. It had come from Elise, the betrothed he had left behind in Normandy. She had written while the bells still rang from their parting, her words tender, brimming with hope. My dearest Henri, though the sea separates us, I hold fast to the day you will return. I keep your ribbon near my heart, and each prayer I offer is bound with your name. Return swiftly, beloved, for the orchard blossoms too soon without you. But Henri never answered. Not because his heart was cold, nor because he forgot her, but because fate had denied him the chance. Each time he sought to write, the campaign pulled him onward. Riders sent homeward were slain, ships sunk in storms, couriers robbed along forested roads. When at last he sat down to reply, pen trembling, an arrow cut him down before ink touched page. The folded letter Elise had written was found on his body, stained with mud and blood. It was returned months later, the seal broken by rough hands, the parchment crumbled. Elise received it not as a comfort but as a wound. She pressed it to her lips, though it carried no new words, only the silent echo of the love she had given and never heard returned. And so, not every medieval love letter fulfilled its purpose. Some remained unsent, unread, undelivered, testimonies not of triumph, but of absence, of how fragile even ink could be when weighed against the march of war and death. Riddles and coded hearts. Not all love letters of the Middle Ages were solemn confessions or aching laments. Some were games, delicate puzzles crafted to delight the beloved. In monasteries, where silence ruled but affection still flickered, novices scratched verses in the margins of psalters, words disguised in acrostics, or hidden within prayers. A young scribe in Chartres once wrote to the woman he adored, but dared not name her. His letter was filled with riddles, each line beginning with a different letter. When pieced together, the first letters spelled out her name. To most, It read like an innocent meditation. To her, it was unmistakable, a whisper hidden in plain sight. Courtly lovers often exchanged charades, in their writing, descriptions of objects or animals whose qualities symbolized longing. One knight compared his lady to a falcon tethered, fierce yet bound. Another likened his own heart to a locked chest, awaiting her key. Sometimes, the playfulness carried a sharper edge. A lady of Provence once teased her suitor in verse. You write of my eyes, my lips, my hands. Yet when I asked of your sword, you sent only words. Shall I wed parchment, or do you bring yourself? Such riddles and coded barbs turned letters into arenas of wit, where intellect and passion mingled. Love was not only a flame but also a contest, each letter an arrow shot, each reply a shield raised. And in this dance of cleverness, affection deepened. For to understand the hidden meaning was to prove one's devotion, to show that the heart was not only moved, but also sharp enough to grasp the secret beneath the ink. Letters across forbidden divides. In the bustling port city of Palermo, where Christians, Muslims, and Jews lived side by side, love sometimes bloomed in secret, crossing boundaries that the world declared unbridgeable. And when it did, the letter became the only vessel bold enough to carry such love. One story tells of Miriam, the daughter of a Jewish merchant, who exchanged letters with a young Christian scholar studying in the city. They met only once, in the market, their eyes lingering too long over baskets of figs. Words unspoken there became words etched in ink by night. His letters were written in Latin, careful and precise, cloaked in metaphors of light and gardens. Hers came in Hebrew, translated clumsily into his tongue by her own hand, filled with warmth, yet edged with fear. I send you these words as though they are doves. Perhaps they will fly to you unseen, perhaps they will fall into the sea. But if you read them, know that my heart is not bound by the walls our people raise. They could not meet often, and never openly. Their letters were delivered by trusted servants, hidden among bills of trade. Each carried not only longing, but also risk. Discovery could mean ruin for her family, exile for him, shame for them both. Yet still they wrote. For letters could pass where bodies could not, crossing the forbidden space between them like a bridge of ink. History does not say if they endured, or if their letters eventually ceased, lost to caution or time. But fragments of such letters survive, reminders that even in an age ruled by borders and laws, the human heart found ways to slip through the cracks. Echoes in ink. Centuries have passed since the quills fell silent, since wax seals cooled and couriers vanished into dust. Yet the love letters of the Middle Ages remain, fragile, yellowed, tucked in archives and monasteries, sometimes forgotten in private chests. Their ink has faded, but their voices have not. Read aloud today, they carry the same tremor of longing, the same rush of hope and fear. A vow written before battle still quickens the pulse. A playful riddle still brings a smile. A farewell penned by candlelight still has the power to ache. These letters remind us that while castles have crumbled and kingdoms vanished, the language of the heart has never changed. Desire, hesitation, devotion, all are written in strokes that speak across time, more enduring than the stone towers of their age. Perhaps that is their greatest gift, to show us that behind the grandeur of medieval courts and the austerity of monasteries, there were simply men and women who loved, who doubted, who risked themselves in words. They trusted ink to carry what their lips could not speak, what their world often forbade them to say. And so, when we hold their letters today, it is as though we hold a whisper from across 1,000 years, tender, trembling, still alive. The parchment may fade. The seals may crumble. But the human heart, once poured into ink, is never truly lost.